James, a lot of you know anyway, the Associate Director of Culinary Innovation for Dole Packaged Foods. And it's really kind of cool what you're going to do today, talk about these new product lines that are coming out and how they're really designed, and what your focus is to, talk about labor saving, right? For the
Yeah.
most part, and visual presentations, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to be really cool. And then Amanda Torgerson, she has, worked with us in the past. She did it one of these a couple of 2 months ago, I guess, right? It was May.
Yeah.
Yeah. So nice to have you back again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you're going to talk today a little bit more about, again, the visual image and how social media plays. I think this is going to be really interesting, how social media plays much more of a role. Ironically, I went to lunch at a Lebanese restaurant that's, like a block away from my office. And I eat there. I call it the company cafeteria. And it's so funny, after we're talking about what you're discussing today, he just said the same thing. He showed me, he just opened a new Italian restaurant. And so the Italian restaurant, this guy went off on a diatribe of it was 4 different paragraphs. I mean, probably almost 200 words, and giving him a 2-star. And I'm like, when I see stuff like that, and you should have seen, it was things like the tomatoes taste like they were like they were created in a greenhouse. I'm like, well, that's actually not a negative. That's kind of cool. I mean, some of the best tomatoes come out of that, right? But I read through it and I said, give me the guy's name. So I looked it up. Sure enough, he owns an advertising agency. I said, look up his clients, because I guarantee he probably has an Italian restaurant within a mile of your place, right? And so that's what you're going to talk about too. It's like, it's a whole different world that operators have to deal with today. And fortunately, for most of our members, they've got entire departments that know how to handle this stuff. But the independent guy doesn't, right? And that's what's sad.
Absolutely. I just wanted to start us off with just a quick pulse on where we're at. I think this is all going to be things that you all are very familiar with, intimately experiencing every day. I sometimes find that it's helpful to have some data behind things, just to, kind of feel like you're not alone and kind of understand the pressures that the industry is facing. So to start off, we've got operator challenges that we track. So we track traffic expectations, biggest concerns for operators, and some profitability strategies that they're employing as well. So overall, we're kind of seeing that traffic expectations are pretty stable, which is good news. We see a little bit of softening this past month in April, but overall, things are kind of holding steady, and hopefully all of you are experiencing that at your brands as well, where you may be seeing just a touch of softening, but things aren't shifting too dramatically. But those big challenges that I'm sure you're constantly talking about are going to be food costs, labor costs, and labor recruitment, along with retaining that current staff. Those really are the issues plaguing that kind of back of house part of the industry, making sure those profit margins stay appropriate and viable, and making sure that you've actually got people in the back of house and staff. Some of those strategies that operators are using, raising menu prices, we are seeing slow down just a touch. Consumers are definitely very price sensitive, so I think operators are kind of being careful, and you'll want to be careful about how much price actually gets raised. But I love to see that launching new menu items, grabbing those LTOs on your menu, those exciting new products, are just as effective as a profitability strategy as raising those menu prices. They can be just as effective as kind of reaching that new audience and bringing in some more dollars. And we also wanted to look, and we have been tracking what's happening with minimum wage laws. So overall, we tracked this from the consumer and the operator perspective to kind of get consumers' opinions. What do they think about minimum wage laws increasing? How do they feel about it? How is that going to change their behavior? For the most part, consumers are in favor of the raise, which is probably why it's passing with certain states. I know California just passed. And consumers are kind of going down the line of being in favor of just getting rid of tipping altogether. I think there's a lot of tipping fatigue in the industry. The idea of a singular wage is kind of appealing. And where I love to see the rationality of consumers, because sometimes we see a little bit of irrationality, is over here, where how consumers are thinking about how these laws are going to impact their experience at a restaurant, And most of them are acutely understanding that this will raise menu prices. Because I think that's always the fear, right? That's the fear of changing this kind of structure, is then prices will just have to be too high and consumers won't want to go anymore to a restaurant. But I think consumers are acutely aware of the fact that menu prices will raise to compensate for this increased wage law. Consumers would, for the most part, not do a ton to change their behavior. So 36% say they wouldn't change habits at all if they knew workers were paid a higher wage. They'd still go, they'd still tip. But a couples do say that they would reduce their tip. I don't think this is going to be a huge reduction. I think this is more, if you think about, I know I started increasing my tips significantly during the pandemic. I think a lot of that behavior is kind of held on. The standards now on the iPads are, 20, 25, and 30%. Some consumers bat an eye at that. I kind of just am used to it, but maybe with that higher wage, things will come back down to a little bit of that more original level of like a 15 to 20% tip. There is also a lot of operators talking about the potential for service fees to help offset the minimum wage increases. Consumers kind of have mixed feelings on this. About a third say they would still tip their servers normally, but a little bit larger of a portion say that they would pay the service fee, but then reduce the tip accordingly. So they're kind of planning to spend the same amount. How you want to divvy it up as the restaurant is kind of up to you, but consumers are kind of expecting to pay a certain range, and that's kind of where they're going to stick. From the operator perspective, we do see a decent amount also supporting the raise of wage. I do think, though, it raises concern for the viability of operations and operators and, your fellow restaurants that you work with. 39% say they would be pretty concerned if something like that were to pass. And most of them say, you would have to raise menu prices. That's just the natural order of things. Most, though, kind of align with consumers, not necessarily going the service fee route. So something to keep in mind. But where I think this becomes really interesting for thinking about your back of house processes and how you're going to have to think about your menu is that a lot of times the outcome of this is that you might have to reduce the number of workers that you have available in the shift. You might have to increase the cross functionality of your workers. So having prep cooks help with the front of house, having front of house help in the back of house with like basic garnishes or basic preparations. Some operators say they would even need to scale back or postpone hiring plans. And so I think this really brings up a conversation of how do you accommodate this on your menu? How do you build a consistent experience every single time if you're scaling back your employees? And then lastly here, I just wanted to talk through some of the areas where operators do kind of work with their staff to decide on working conditions. This is more just to give you all a guideline of what you can expect potential employees as you are trying to recruit labor to kind of have as baseline expectations. So they would want input on scheduling, on their scheduled breaks, and on their wages are going to be the big ones that they're going to be concerned about. So that's just kind of a broad state of the industry, just kind of a good understanding of where we're at. Labor definitely being that chief concern. I want to move now into marketing, social media, and modernizing your brand. And I think here there's a really interesting tension. There's a tension in that you have to go for a value play, right? Like as operators, you can't overprice things. Consumers are very value conscious. You have less staff available to you, but more and more your food is showing up online. Your brand is being represented by the individual consumers who are visiting your restaurant. Just like Kevin had, the Lebanese restaurant he went to, someone left a review online that is impacting the restaurant's brand. And this is happening for restaurants all over the country. So it's it sucks, right? Like it's a hard place to be in where you've got less labor to work with, but you're going to have to put out a more consistent, colorful, beautiful, exciting product. So everyone just always wants a little bit more. So we'll talk through some marketing strategies, and at the end, we'll talk through some kind of ways to combat that tension that we're facing. I know there's a lot of text on this slide. The summary here is that brand identities are very different than what they used to be. Taco Bell used to be a taco joint, like quick tacos, late night. Now Taco Bell is so much more. And this is true of tons of brands out there. Brands have clothing line, brands have home goods, brands have immersive experiences. People getting brands, like people, I have friends who only drink Dunkin' coffee. That is part of their personality. That is part of their everyday life. So it's just becoming a much broader field to market within than just, playing in just that restaurant space. You're kind of having to play in a lot more spaces. 97% of consumers use at least one social media platform. So this is really, truly a ubiquitous thing. Everyone's online. Everyone's kind of using this in some way or another. And this translates into action for the food service industry. 52% of consumers have purchased a food, beverage, or ingredient just because they saw it on social media. I know I myself have done this. I tried the viral like feta and tomato pasta from TikTok a few years ago. Birria tacos, which I'll talk about on the next slide, are something that I first saw online and then just had to try myself. This behavior is even more common with Gen Z consumers. 62% of them say that they've purchased something online because they saw it on TikTok. So you're going to want to make sure that these dishes are really beautifully stunning. This is the viral rainbow bagel from years ago, making sure that they're exciting and that they translate really well to those formats. We've got birria as an example of something that really kind of started online. Obviously didn't start there. It started in Mexico where it was created, but it became popular online. There were some great videos of just these beautiful succulent meat being dipped in that gorgeous consomme. Made it a really appealing thing. I think really blew it up on menus across the country. We saw this with smash burger tacos as well, just as like a fun, easy recipe for consumers to try at home that are really tasty. Smashed gyozas are becoming a thing now as well, taking that same format, but with a dumpling wrapper. So these kinds of online trends are really translating into the food service world and into the food world. Got a quote here from Adweek about how creator-led marketing really has opened up a new frontier for promotional campaigns. There's so many more opportunities to get consumers excited about new products. TikTok is where a lot of this happens, but this happens on Instagram as well. It's a lot of video content that's influencing brands in both directions, right? Brands influencing consumers and consumers influencing brands. One of the great examples of consumers influencing brands here are some brands who took some really creative action on two of the fun TikTok trends that happened late last year. There was the girl dinner trend, which was just eating, a collection of sides as dinner. I myself have been guilty of this for a time or two, just having like Oreos and popcorn and like Brussels sprouts for dinner. And you're like, what is this? Popeyes said, hey, we have a bunch of great sides on our menu. They're already here. They're already back of house. Let's just pre-package or repackage them into a new offering and call it girl dinner and market it on the menu and throw it up. Really quick, easy activation. A lot of people were talking about, they're like, this is exactly what I want to order on the menu. Similarly, there was this fun boy math trend that was kind of speaking to ordering catering or getting these I know a lot of people were getting like full Chipotle like catering trays and then using it for meal prep throughout the week. Jimmy John said, hey, we have catering, go ahead, buy your sandwiches from us for the week. We'll call it boy math. So just taking something existing and kind of jumping on those trends can be a great way to easily insert yourself into a broader conversation. We also see this in the overall brand of the brands that you work with. So 28% of consumers say it's okay for food brands to be more real or funny or even risque online. Feeling free to be sassy, customers are responding with bad reviews to your restaurant. Maybe it makes sense to clap back a little bit, to say something back. Got to be careful, but always something to think about. I think there's a little bit more openness, especially for younger generations, of this being more of a conversation and less of a I'm marketing to you. Wendy's, for example, has their National Roast Day, which they actually created. And their social media manager basically sits on Twitter, X, X now. I always feel so weird saying X, but they sit there and they'll say like, we'll roast you. And so people kind of chat in and they're like, roast me. Other brands have done it to them. It kind of starts a dialogue online where they're actually like actively making fun of people online, but it's really funny. It's witty, it's cheeky, it's a really fun way to see the brand kind of take life. Quote here from Taco Bell. We've seen fans express their Taco Bell fandom through so many avenues. So it's not just, they're ones I called out at the beginning. They're not just a taco brand anymore. They've been selling a ton of merch. They had a luggage collaboration with Calpac with these really fun luggages. They sold socks. I myself own a Taco Bell hat that I just think is really funny and fun. It's a really great way to kind of expand the personality of the brand and get consumers engaged just past, going in and getting their favorite item. We see this in trends as well. So Cheetos actually created their own trend, the Flamin' Hot Challenge, where they actually sent out their Carolina Reaper Cheetos to a group of influencers and they had them try them on camera and try to keep a straight face or like see how much the spice kind of affected them, which became a really fun challenge for people to watch. And that also then encouraged them to go out, buy the product, try it out themselves, take videos themselves, and really engage with the brand. We've seen this take shape with some truly absurd products. DiGiorno debuted these pizza-flavored donuts called DiGiornuts. They took the idea of like eating pizza for breakfast and actually turned it into a donut. It was kind of this limited time engagement. Consumers had to DM in and like the brand to be eligible, and then they could be sent them, and then they could, of course, post videos of them trying these rather absurd pizza bagels, or pizza donuts, sorry. Pizza bagels sound reasonable. Pizza donuts, I don't know. But it gets us talking, right? It gets us kind of chuckling and excited. Subway launched a literal blimp into the sky in 4 major cities. They kind of did a first come, first serve experience where consumers could line up, come, be taken up to a blimp, and actually visit a Subway restaurant in the sky in a blimp. So it's kind of a fun way to debut some of their new Deli Hero line and get consumers really excited. And the last one I've got for you here is fully absurd. I was telling James about this one and he was just shaking his head like he is now. Jack Link's hosted a jerky-themed meat retreat. Everything in the room is designed to look like meat or jerky. They've got some like charcuterie body pillows there at the end. I don't know if you can see the lamps in this photo are gigantic steaks. They had a marination station, which was their hot tub. Consumers could try to win basically a stay at the meat retreat. So
Is that the artwork above the bed? Is that Sasquatch or something? I can't.
I think it is. Yeah, it looks like with a top hat. So they really went full in on the Western theme. Just a really funny, fun way to get people excited and talking about a brand. So a lot of these strategies are reaching consumers, pop-up restaurants, trying a special edition limited time product, following their brands on social media, entering contests. All of these are things that consumers are doing, notably things that Gen Z and millennial consumers are doing even more. So I think this is just encouragement to be really creative with your menu. If you've thought, if you've got a list of ideas that you've thought about that were absolutely ridiculous or disgusting, maybe pull them back up. Maybe, DiGiornuts isn't such a terrible idea after all. But while this can be all very positive for your brand, I think Kevin had a really great example of how this can be negative for your brand as well. And here I've got a really great example of the kind of like Instagram versus reality or expectation versus reality idea. It pops up a lot on Instagram and on TikTok. This is a restaurant called Alice in Dallas, Texas. This recently got posted. There was one influencer who visited the brand, likely on like an invited visit, took these beautiful photos of the food that I've got here on either ends of the slide, where you see this gorgeous sushi, these gorgeous cocktails. And in reality, when they showed up to actually experience that, They got a super burnt egg roll. And then the photo down here in the corner is actually a snippet from a video where they were like picking up the item and watching it like bounce because it was so blubbery that it was actually bouncing. So truly kind of, you know, a letdown. If you've seen something on social media and you're excited about it, and then you go into the restaurant, typically those prices are going to be a little more elevated as well. And not having that experience match that reality, consumers, they've got, you know, a news camera in their pocket on their iPhone. Like they can take that video, they can share it with their friends. That can happen. And that's where that consistency in making things as easy as possible for a rotating back of house staff becomes so necessary because you don't want this to happen to your brand. This happens too with staff, with delivery people. This is Josh Cavallero. He is a DoorDash deliverer. And he posts every single day on TikTok his experience dropping things off to consumers and the weird experiences that he has with consumers that he delivers to and with the restaurants themselves. So kind of all parts of this experience are up for grabs. I see videos all the time on TikTok of like fast food employees or restaurant employees kind of, a lot of times they're cute and funny, right? Like joking around online. These are all common experiences that get shared. And the last thing here in this section that I want to leave you with is just a reminder that value is going to be top of mind for consumer, but it's also an encouragement to think about the fact that value is so much more than price. If you're going to Alice and you saw that beautiful video of the sushi, the value might not need to be, you know, like a happy hour deal or some kind of cut price, but instead it's like, does it match the expectation? Do I get to post about it on social media? Do I get to go to the cool spot or try the cool thing that I saw being tried? Is it as beautiful as I expected? So I would just encourage you all to keep that in mind, to really make that experience consistent and exciting for your consumers.
Amanda and I kind of discussed a little bit, you know, in advance of this call of just kind of stuff that we've been really watching at Dole as kind of motivation for how we're building out our new product offerings and how we innovate around kind of solutions for partnership products with, you know, the operators on this call and in the industry as a whole. And the one thing that I keep coming back to is just this idea that the marketing voice now no longer really lies with the brand, right? It now lies with the consumer. So, and for better or for worse, whatever that means, right? That can be either very, you know, self-propagating and very organic, or it could be very detrimental because, you know, I think at this point you've got, for the most part, very uneducated people taking very influential pictures and posting them wherever they can get a voice, right? And, you know, we were talking about food reviews a little earlier, and I was resisting the urge of just saying, well, any idiot can pick up a pen and write a review,
Yeah.
right? And that still stands true to like really any person can pick up a phone and take a picture of your food and represent your brand and what the quality and, you know, consistency of your brand looks like, and what an LTO might look like, or what a new menu item might look like out of any location in the country. And so,
Oh,
go
I
on,
was
Kevin.
just going to add in, you know, a lot of people didn't hear what I said early on. I was just as we were starting, but the comment that I made is the gentleman, it's a new restaurant, he was sharing with me, you know, this 2-star review he got, and this thing was like 4 major paragraphs long. I mean, it was huge. And as I read through it, you're going, you can just read through the lines. First of all, this person knows way too much about the industry. And so, of course, I said, what's his name? And I looked it up, and he owns an advertising agency in town. So I'm like, chances are he probably handles an Italian restaurant that's within a mile of the location. And so the ulterior motive, and that's what drives me crazy with all the research we do when we travel and do these events around the country. I never, ever go to Yelp or any of those things. I just don't, because it's just, I don't trust it. I don't trust it at all. You know,
well, it takes a really genuine person to actually go out and write a glowing review, rather than it takes a very easy and kind of, you know, throwaway, sometimes a very frustrated moment where you go out and you write a very negative review. So largely, you know, Yelp is kind of overly skewed towards those negative experiences because you feel so enraged by that moment of like, I got to tell somebody about how much I hated this experience or how jaded I was.
Yeah.
And so you get a very kind of like skewed impression of what the service experience or the food or even, you know, the quality and consistency of a product can be purely by looking at, sometimes the very captured and, engagement of enraged people at times.
Right, exactly. And we all know, I mean, every restaurant or server or whatever can have a bad day. That's
100%.
fine.
Even the
There's nothing
consumer can
wrong
have
with
a
that.
bad day,
Yeah, if you don't
right?
have negative, comments, it's like you're probably not a busy restaurant. But
Yeah, totally true.
so,
Yeah, it's totally true.
but I think the thing that I was just laughing when I read this. That's why I said I've got to like look this person up, because it was thing that I mentioned earlier. Like the one that got me the most. There were several of these, right? But the one that was like the tomatoes tasted like they were greenhouse tomatoes, and I'm like, that's some of the best tomatoes I've ever had in my life. Like that's not a negative comment, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But he said it in a really negative way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, I mean, to kind of backpack, or kind of piggyback off what a lot of Amanda has kind of been presenting on, it's this idea that, how can now us as the operator, really try to have as much influence on what that marketing voice is, still coming out of the third party kind of source, the consumer source. So, do we do that through vibrancy of colors? Yes, right. Through textures and textures that can still come across in that visual medium, and consistency, kind of keeps coming back to the top of, the conversation, right? Where if you have that one signature dish that your concept is known for, or the new LTO that your concept is known for, and everybody's coming in and taking pictures of it, and you have 500 pictures that all look like a different dish, then it's never really going to speak to the quality or the consistency of your brand, right? And it's never going to promote that confidence or trust in the back of house capability or anything like that. So that's really how we've been trying to formulate, I suppose, a lot of the kind of mentality, but behind, some of the new product development that we've been doing at Dole. Kind of give a bit of a peek behind the curtain of what we've kind of what we got going on and what we're going to bring out. So it's just this idea of, focusing on being in focus, right? That idea of making sure that food is good enough for the camera every single time, and that it is really as best representative, where you don't have the food stylist at your predetermined, photo shoot location tweaking and, glossing it with glycerin, or making sure that the ice cream's melting in the right way, or whatever. You don't have that touch and finesse. You have to rely on the one person who has 3 friends all holding a flashlight to try and saturate the picture, right? We've all done it for Michael,
Yes, exactly.
for Mike on our tours. So it's that idea of, how do we kind of present our food in that way possible? So we've taken a bit of a step back at Dole in terms of turning out new products, where we're trying to do it in as collaborative as a format as possible, where we're actually doing a lot more kind of like pilot-based launches of new products rather than full run launches. So what this means is we're really collaborating with the operators to make sure that the new products that we're launching are as insightful and needs-based driven as possible, rather than us just seeing a hole in the market and going, well, we can find a fruit for that, and we'll just shove it right on in there and, and give you another item code on your buying guide, right? So, it's this idea of, I know you all know kind of Dole's products, and, our kind of competencies largely lies in, our chef ready cut line, of just this idea of pre-cut, pre-washed, labor reducing or labor kind of saving solutions, where you're really looking for kind of 100% yield out of the product that you buy from us. That's really kind of our main mantra is you use 100% of the product that you buy, right? You never throw away the wasted stuff. You never throw away the peels and the cuts and the cores type thing. So we really tried marching forward with that. And some of the new products that we're developing are really based around that mantra, combined with this idea of community-driven marketing. So the number one, I suppose, new one is that if you guys haven't already seen it or you haven't received samples from us yet, it's this idea of recapturing, I suppose, the very very viral and kind of community-driven fanaticism around Dole Whip. And so Dole Whip, if you're not familiar with it, hopefully you are, but if you're not, it's probably, I think, the longest, running product at Disney that's a non-Disney branded product, right? And Disney try telling everybody that will listen they own the brand Dole Whip. They do not. fortunately enough.
I love that.
Dole does, although they will defend it as virally as they could possibly entice. But we decided to kind of help recapture that and kind of create this this brand that makes it really easy to kind of market and deliver what Dole Whip is and what it should be, and the convenience around it. So we've created these kind of 3 base products that are really good for kind of grab and go items, or a kind of add on to a tray that's going out of a window, or a kid's plate or something like that. Where the main difference between the product that's served at theme parks and these cups is that fruit is actually now the first ingredient on the ingredient statement. So it has no refined added sugar. So we're really trying to make sure that we kind of bring it back to this idea of convenience, and this idea of, not necessarily needing as large of a equipment set back of house, but also something that is going to deliver the same visual aspect every single time you open it from a consumer standpoint. They're always going to crack that green lid, that green lid. Spoon's always going to be there. They're still going to have that same message of, brightness and frivolity on the film on the top of the cap, and then opening it to get that same creamy, consistency inside the cup. The next one is a really fun one. This is something that I've been really driving for internally a lot, is this idea of citrus. So citrus, if you've ever worked behind the bar, if you've ever worked in a bar, you know that citrus is usually one of the few things that maybe doesn't get washed all the time. And yet we're dumping it into every drink that we drink out there, or it's going through the hands of many different people, or it's being cut with a blunt blade back of house by somebody who maybe doesn't hold a knife very regularly. So we've developed an entire line of IQF citrus. So sliced in wedges, lemons and limes that are coming frozen. They are an incredible product. They are launching this year, and we're really excited. The quality of them is phenomenal. But the difference is that now we have worked to get this idea of, you'll get citrus that delivers a huge amount of squirt of juice every single time you squeeze it, right? God forbid you try to get that consumer who's now got that beautiful cocktail come to their table. They take the wedge off the top and they're videoing themselves, and they go to squeeze it. It's a dry piece of citrus and nothing comes out of it, and it just looks dry and mealy. And now you're like, well, great, I got the piece of lime that was from the beginning of week's prep, and today is Friday, right? Or the same with the lemon wedges right next to your fish tacos or fish and chips or something like that. So these are really fun. This is something that we're really getting behind. I think it's really going to change a lot of the labor set and requirement and drain that happens both in the front and the back of the house. The next one is this idea of color and vibrancy in social media, right? That idea of kind of pulling out vibrancy and pulling out intrigue out of products that tend to be very labor intensive traditionally. So without necessarily relying on artificial colors or flavors or anything like that. So we're launching a new line of puree chips in 3 flavor combinations. Passion fruit is one, and I'm talking like true to fresh passion fruit. It is passion fruit puree. It is, the de-seeded pulp that you get out of the passion fruit. It is nice and tart. It's got all that vibrancy of color, and it is really, really, really beautiful. Pomegranate and blood orange is another one. Ruby red, like, taking out all the labor and effort of, pomegranate arils and stuff like that, where we put it into this really tropical, very vibrant, very citrusy pomegranate blood orange puree. And then acai and banana, getting a really nice kind of like creamy texture out of it, a really nice mouthfeel, kind of really leveraging that smoothie base. We have, the 3 pictures on here are recipes that we've already gone ahead and, created, where we've done a passion fruit panna cotta, or we did a acai and banana no-bake cheesecake. We made probably one of the best granitas I've ever had in my entire life, using the pomegranate blood orange as the granita base. Was insane. But it's just this idea of kind of creating nice tropical experiences and kind of like craveable or, envy-worthy recipe descriptions, or at least captionable descriptions that you can put on a social media post. with ingredients that tend to have an allure of higher price premium without necessarily carrying the price premium to the end operator.
Hey, James, what are the size of
Yeah.
these chips? Do you have a
So
firm
yeah, so it's
coming up?
basically like so if you looked at an ice cube tray,
Yeah.
it's basically half the height of an ice cube out of those ice cube trays, but the
Cool.
same kind of like dimension, length and width.
Mm-hmm.
So we call them an ice cube chip, because, you know, I suppose they look like the chips that you get out of the hospital, like the ice vending machine out of the hospital if you're there with your wife while she's in labor. But you know, it's those kind of that profile. So, you know, we have recipes where you can throw these chips into a shaker and shake them with a cocktail, and by the time you're done shaking, they've dissolved and they're already now part of the whole drink. So they're really, really cool. They're a ton of fun, you know, kind of whisking into salad dressings or other kind of applications. But yeah, you'll see these a lot more from me and from my culinary staff and kind of recipe applications throughout the year as we kind of progress in events. But we're really excited about these. The other one is obviously Good Crunch, which I think I've now started showing to a lot of the people on this call, is this idea of, you know, kind of upcycling and a lot of that kind of communicable message that the consumers are looking for from social media. You know, a lot of those like hot hashtags at the moment are that idea of sustainable or eco-friendly or eating my waste or, you know, whatever kind of like very cringe-worthy, you know, hashtag and convoluted sentence that they can put into one streamed garble of letters, where I think I have to take maybe 3 or 4 passes to try and read what an actual hashtag says when I see it all in one line, because some of them are like 40 letters long. But this is that idea of really kind of taking something, you know, from our kind of cycle of process where we're using pieces of pineapple or in other instances bananas, but for the main kind of large bulk pack, these pieces of pineapple that are just being dried. So they're not like freeze dried. They don't rehydrate like a freeze dried piece of fruit. They're not tacky, but they stay crunchy with either a salad dressing on them or in a beverage for like up to 2 hours. Like they're really crunchy. Think a crouton, but made out of pineapple. They're gluten free too, which is really cool. But they're only one ingredient. So that's, I suppose, is part of the kind of like clean label, clean eats, you know, what is another term, another hot phrase, a keto friendly, you know, all those kind of like phrases that you hope are attaching themselves to your brand organically when it, you know, I suppose, you know, naming things. I think I saw on a bag of very benign product the other day. It was something like a bag of like bananas or banana chips or something like that. It said gluten free. And I was like, I didn't know gluten was ever a consideration of this product. Why would you need to state gluten free? And I think they were just slapping on every branded, you know, hot phrase that they could possibly put onto it, right?
Yeah.
Or vegan bananas, which was I suppose my favorite phrase that I'd seen in a while. And then how we are kind of consolidating this into kind of reference for inspiration to you guys is this idea that was, I got to give credit where credit's due. This is largely inspired by the ICCA and GCIA. So this is this idea of the food hot centers of, you know, tradition are LA, Chicago, New York, right? Where we see the kind of greatest food trends coming out of those 3 amazing hubs. However, we see incredible iterations of some of the most amazing globally inspired food coming out of small boroughs in America, right? Where I've seen some incredible Somalian food coming out of Columbus, Ohio, or I've seen amazing Vietnamese food coming out of South Carolina, right? Or Ethiopian food that we had in DC, you know, that type of thing. So
you're right, James. And there's some really weird things like, you know, who knew that St. Louis is one of the biggest Peruvian, you know,
right,
communities in the United States.
100%.
I know you get to these places, you're
100%.
like, wow, why? I don't know why, but it's good
But
because the food's
the cool
awesome.
thing
Right.
is I think it shows as an example that these cuisine types, or at least these applications of ingredients and styles of eating, are as approachable as we hope they can be to the Bible Belt or to the middle of America. You know, they're usually very, for lack of a better phrase, vanilla, right?
Yeah.
Consumers, where usually as culinarians, we're always very kind of timid of putting out something adventurous in those states. These cultural boroughs are proving that the food can exist. The food can find home and palates and successful business mantra in these kind of states. So we created this platform for this year called Fruitful Destinations, where we've really kind of deep dived into some of the most amazing kind of food and cultural identity boroughs across America. And we're now showing how they're using fruit and some of the most, visually enticing applications of our product, or not even our product, just fruit in general, on menus. And we're writing concepts around and inspired by that. So that's our kind of Fruitful Destinations platform in a very 90 seconds elevator pitch. But yeah, that's how we've kind of really been thinking about it, to kind of tie back into what Amanda kind of presented on at the beginning, is this idea that marketing is now no longer kind of our brand's effort, right? It is now, how do we control the voice of the consumer as much as possible through the output from our kitchens or the output from our bars, whilst making it look like we're not always steering the consumer to that paid for experience that they're seeing influencers coming in and doing. We're hoping that it is an organic experience that's coming from any consumer that comes in. So that consistency and replicability is going to be really something that's very important, something that we're trying to produce products around to kind of help leverage in the back of house. So that's all I had from a presentation standpoint.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much, James. That's really cool. I'm going to ask you a question. We're pulling some other people on now too that can
do it
and talk to this. But the lemon and lime, when we talked originally about that product, talk a little bit, because it makes all the sense in the world that when you freeze something, right, you get more liquid out of it. So the yield is actually better. Go off on that a little bit, because I think it's a major plus.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose something that we've kind of like really stumbled upon is this, and it's something that we've really kind of followed on for, hey, Jimmy boy, look at you with the sliced limes in the background. I love it. This idea that, a lot of our frozen fruit that we already know that we witness a lot of this beautiful kind of valuable slack kind of being released as it thaws back out, right? So that slack is something that we always market to our operators to leverage and use, right? If you pour out that slack, you're just pouring out flavor, you're pouring out money, and you're pouring out profit that you've paid for anyway. So you might as well figure out a solution of what you can do with that slack, whether it's putting it into a water and making an agua fresca out of it, using it in a salad dressing or a marinade or whatever. So it was the same thing that kind of really followed on in the citrus element. Was the biggest thing that you do with a citrus prior to cutting it is you roll it, right? You roll it on the countertop to try and make sure that you get as much juice out of it as possible before you cut it. You hope it's not the dry one, right? You hope it's not the one big mealy one that just throws all the segments everywhere and it looks like it's just a shaggy mess. Because then your consumer thinks, you're not buying the best quality product for me. Why am I spending the bucks on you? Type thing. So a lot of the citrus that a lot of the kind of QA that we went through was just this idea of, how do we develop a freezing process that makes the wedge look like it was cut back of house minutes before it's gone into the glass? Yeah. But also, how do we create a process that doesn't make all that juice disappear or vanish in the slack? So the wedges that we've created, they hold the juice, but the minute you squeeze it, you get like a tablespoon out of every wedge, or like 2 tablespoons out of every wedge. It's really, really cool. So I think I've licked more wedges of lemons and limes in the last 6 months than I would ever care to admit, ever. But it is very dynamically different what the quality and kind of flavor of citrus is, even from all over the world. Like, we're pulling stuff from South Africa and Vietnam and Peru and all this stuff, really trying to make sure that we find year-long seasonality that has like stable pricing. Because the pricing of, if you ever follow the pricing of citrus, which is a mind-numbing process, but it is also a very aggressive process, is that citrus fluctuates like crazy, right? And it's annoying as shit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you cost your recipes of something that might be 10x the cost in 2 months just because, an insect has come through and destroyed a crop, or because there's a protest happening at the dockyards in a country that's trying to export it out to you, type thing. So there's a lot of kind of motivation behind why we were innovating around citrus. And so we kind of saw the opportunity that nobody was really doing it well, or nobody was really doing it here in the US, of, kind of sliced and segmented IQF citrus. So that's kind of where we dove in, and we've found some really good quality products. We're really happy with it. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Appreciate it. All right. So Matt, Karin, Jim, you guys, chime in if you guys have some comments on things that have already been said, or if you have questions. for Amanda or James. Let's hear what's on your mind.
Well, I'm really excited to see those wedges. James, you said you're going to have those at Flavor?
I'll have them at Flavor. I'm also gonna bring in some of the limes for our ICCA summit here in LA.
Yeah.
We're gonna make some good old mojitos. I think we just,
Nice.
you know, we just got to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, and some of those purees would go very well into a certain butter sauce that I know some
You know, it's just
these
thinking the
days.
same
So
thing all day.
yeah, let's collaborate.
That's
I love it.
awesome.
I really like the fact that you're taking the pineapple and basically drying it, right? So it becomes like a crouton.
Yeah.
And I think people expect to get their citrus, their fruit in a particular way. And this opens up a completely different application. Not only when you look at what I think restaurants are looking at in terms of how do you make money so you perhaps have less team members in the back of the house. How do you take these processes out? And there's a whole industry that's grown out of making croutons for restaurants.
Yeah.
But you can create a fruit salad and use this product. Now all of a sudden you have something that's differentiating.
Yeah, agreed.
And really interesting. I think that Amanda's kind of comments about the state of the industry. I don't know if we're seeing some of the things that they're seeing on both coasts because we're primarily in the middle of the country. But there is a big scare around, where will it stop for restaurants? And prices, I think, at least for us, have somewhat moderated, although labor continues to go up. And there seems to be the squeeze on the operators in the companies, and it's just hard, And I think that what we're seeing this year, at least what we're seeing, is the instability of an uncertain fall is causing people to consider where they spend their dining dollars. And fast casual is fortunate that the majority of guests are still with us. And but it's a big concern. It's a big concern about how you pay your teams. We've fortunately been lucky enough to have some great turnover lately. But there's a lot of big things that I think that, James, you're putting a lot of thought into how you can supply innovative products for restaurants, and I think it shows. Great job.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that comment, Matt. One of the things interesting to me, of course, I've seen this tipping thing go around and about for many years now, and I'll never forget in New York, we had some really horrible experiences at Danny Meyer's restaurants where you always had the best of service. And then when he went to that, they were paid a salary. They'd stand in the back and talk to each other, and you're waiting for your check or whatever. It was a horrible experience. Now, given the fact they might have been almost unionized to do that to, piss everybody off so that he had to stop doing it. But I'm surprised to see, Amanda, and I wanted to hear from you on that, is I was really surprised to see that more than 50% of the people are kind of in favor of the minimum wage is one thing. I totally understand that. That's a whole different thought process than it is of us going toward a tipless, kind of, or a salaried position or front of the house.
I think honestly, it's a reflection and a result of a ton of fatigue, right? Like we're tipping in so many more places. I'm sure all of us on the call experience that as consumers. There's a TikTok trend about that too, of a joke. Like I saw, a man proposing and then he held up the tip screen after his proposal, like as a joke. Like I think that's the reality that we're in, that it's just this absolutely pervasive. And I think it's leaning more and more consumers to this idea of like, I'm just tired of it overall. A lot of times when we do research, restaurants are the one area where it's like, that's what we were doing before and we're fine with it. Like restaurants, taxis, those kind of like original areas. So I think there's a little less resistance. But I will say, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Casa Bonita, made famous by South Park, but it reopened in Denver. And they are a completely tipless operation. It's huge. They do not accept tips in any form. They will tell you no if you try to give them one. There's no spot for it on the check. It's really funny. I went with some friends, and one of them is a chef himself, and he was panicked because he's in the service industry. He tips well, and he was like, I can't tip them. And I'm like, no, they're a tipless organization. Like, they pay their staff double minimum wage. They, have tons of initiatives for their staff, and it worked really well. The food cost wasn't out of control. I felt like a pretty reasonable dining experience. I had great service. They had a really fun way of doing things. You actually raised, it's their original motto, or their original model. You raise the flag when you need help. So you just tell the server when you would like them to come over by raising the flag on the table, just to kind of ease the communication of everyone. So I do think it's a trend. I don't know that we'll ever get there fully, but I do think it's something that's just a result of the fatigue.
I have a question, I suppose, then for kind of off the back of that to both Matt and Karen, but also then I suppose to everybody kind of on the chat, is I've seen this kind of big resistance through social media around this idea of, food through the takeout model or through the kind of like quick service model, where even before you have received your food and tasted your food, you're being asked what you would like to tip.
Yeah.
Right? Which betrays the usual exchange of service for result and quality, and then usually experience, which then results in the justification for the tip. How are you and your brands either supporting the service staff on pushing that, or what's the kind of internal messaging or communication that's happening around that? Because I find that a wild experience to stand at a POS station and be asked to tip something when you haven't even touched the food, or you haven't even seen anything come to you yet. And you're like, well, how do I know what to give you?
I think we're in a unique case, right? Because we're take and bake. So
yeah,
even if you are in our stores and you tip, you have to take it home and cook it, make sure it tastes right. So,
yeah.
so in part of
Tip
it
yourself.
Yeah, right. We get away with that a little bit because people feel like they're tipping for the service of a well-made pizza that they watched go down the make line and get made customized for them, versus tipping on the quality. Because our service is, you get to make your pizza the way you want it, you customize it, and you take it home and bake it yourself. So that's the service you get versus,
I like that. That's super justifiable.
Yeah.
So what about Matt, where you're
So we're fast casual, but we're owned by a boomer. So he isn't, we don't tip. There's no tipping in our stores.
Nice.
And our wages have gone up $4.60 in the last 4 years. And that's the price of doing business, right? If you want to get great people, we pay them more. And the fact of the matter is that nobody in our restaurants even comes close to sniffing minimum wage ever. Now, yes, is it a living wage? Well, that depends on, if the frat boys from the private equity bought the 2 houses down the street and are holding it until the market goes up some more. So, you're not going to be living in an expensive home, but you've got people that are making just as much money as California restaurants with a $20 minimum wage, and we don't have $20 minimum wages, but we just don't do tipping, right? Because we want to give the hospitality, and I think the tax is enough product at the end of the line that you didn't expect. So we're trying to make the model work without it.
Oh, sorry, Karen, I wanted to bring you back on for that too, because explain to some people who may not have been to yours, so when you're paying, so you go in and you order what you want as far as ingredients, and they actually make it in front of you. But are you paying at the end after they made your pizza? You pay before?
No, you go to the cash register, order your pizza, and get asked to tip at the cash register, or online even, right? You can order your pizza, and then online you can put a tip in there if you want.
Right. And then you watch, if you're in the store, then you watch it being made in front of you.
Yeah.
Do a lot of people tip then afterward and say, hey, this person took care of me, I felt it was, they did a great job, cheese and the pepperoni or whatever. Yeah.
No, not really, because in most of our stores, you walk in, go to the cash register, and then the make line's, to the side of you, and you come to the other end of the make line and take your product to go home. Yeah. So to tip or go back up to the tip jar up front, you have to go back up to the cash register. So I imagine that rarely happens. that people go back and go, oh God, they made my pizza great. And they probably just honestly tip out of obligation in a lot of places, right? I feel like they're asking me and I should reward the kids with something. And from an operator's perspective, right, it gives all of us an opportunity to give the staff a raise without impacting your bottom line, which is why we went to it. For years, we didn't do it. And our franchisees are like, give me the opportunity to ask the guests for this because I need to be able to give my kids $3 or $4 an hour more that I'm not paying for.
Yeah.
And so we finally said, okay, let's try this. And
So
that was
the tip actually comes to the house.
ago.
So the tip comes to the house, not an individual, and then it's split.
Every franchisee sort of does it differently, right?
Okay.
That's I've heard cases where both is true, but because if the tip has to come to the house and they split it because there's really only 1 or 2 kids on the register, right? And then you've got the rest of the service crew making pizzas.
Right.
So I would guess in almost all cases they're pooling it.
Yeah.
Now how they're pooling it by the shift that night or by everybody who worked or with the prep cooks in the morning, that's all for the board. But we only have 1 or 2 people on the register. It's not like you have somebody who served you and took care of you in that whole experience. You got somebody on the register and the kids are on the make line making pizza. Yeah. So it generally gets pooled.
Very cool. Well, our time is up. It always flies by, man. An hour just. So any finished thoughts or any kind of thoughts you guys have or final comments you want to make? I'll make a couple of small announcements at the end. And anything? You guys were great. I mean, I love this information. It was really good. It was really different. James, looking forward to seeing your new products at the ICCA Summit, which is coming up in a couple of weeks.
Heck yeah.
I can't wait to try the crunchy pineapple on a Hawaiian pizza.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's awesome. Bakes really, really well.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that. You can have some in LA?
I'll have some in LA. We'll have Good Crunch. We'll have Dole Whip. We'll have the IQS Citrus. We got everything coming on.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've got.
Okay.
I've
never had a Dole Whip, and someone who was listening earlier looked at me like I had 3 heads.
Yeah.
Well, Stice threw up there, how can I get a case? And I'll never forget. I mean, I was so in touch with you guys because of the Disney thing and whatever. My daughter asked me some time ago, it's like, you've got to do this. I know you work with Dole. Could you just have cases sent to my house?
Yeah.
Now you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So anyway, I just want to mention, so the ICCA Summit's coming up. I think everybody pretty much is, registered and got their rooms, but we do have we always reserve a couple more rooms. So if there's somebody who hasn't booked a room yet and needs some help, just let us know. We do it in a funny way. We put them in our dogs' names. So that it's obvious that it's not a real person. So the days before we can say, oh, yes, we'll get rid of that one. But anyway, so that's the 23rd through the 26th. And some of we have board meetings on each side of that. The ICCA Culinary Immersion in Dallas is in November, the 12th through the 15th. That's going to be really cool. And then, of course, the GCIA Culinary Combine is in Santa Fe at the La Fonda on the Plaza Hotel, which is an awesome hotel with great history of the first chain restaurants in America back at the turn of the 1800s and early 1900s. So you'll learn a lot about that. There's a lot of history there for that. And then Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin are hosting a cheese tour July 29th through August 1st. A very small group of people. I think we have a couple of slots still available for that if anybody wants to do that. But that being said, Mike, you're on. We'll show our closing video and say thanks to everybody for being with us today. We appreciate it.